Hi, PSYCH. These are your Module 75 notes on conformity and obedience. Our essential questions are: how do we explain people's behavior? How do we then explain our own behavior? And the big one is, how does the bias of a researcher affect their conclusions? Our learning targets are: I can explain how individuals respond to expectations of others, including today we're looking at conformity and obedience to authority. Groupthink we'll get into in the next module. And finally, I can identify the contributions of key researchers in the areas of conformity, compliance, and obedience. So today we'll be looking at the work of Solomon Asch and Stanley Milgram. We've already talked about Philip Zimbardo. So the first idea to talk about is something called automatic mimicry. So we know that human beings are natural mimics, meaning when we spend time around a group of people, we start unconsciously imitating their expressions, their postures, their gestures, their tone of voice. And this unconscious mimicking is called the chameleon effect. Okay. I know for myself, I'm the advisor to my sorority, and a big chunk of my sorority is out of the South. So anytime there's big like conventions or leadership conferences that I attend, I'm around a lot of women with Southern accents. And I start finding that the more time I spend around them, the more my voice tone changes. Well, I'll start hearing not the full blown Southern accent, but hints of that Southern accent. And it's not anything I'm consciously trying to do, it just starts coming out. Honestly, you probably notice I say y'all a lot. I am from Southern California. I've never lived in the South. Y'all comes from spending time around the pastor at my church. He isn't from Texas originally, but spent a lot of time in Texas. And just listening to him say it all the time, I've just kind of picked it up, and now it's part of my regular vocabulary. One more example, gesturing. You may have noticed as you watch someone else or you start having a conversation, you might start picking up on their level of gesturing, whether it's more subdued or more animated. You might find yourself doing similar. Some other examples of automatic mimicry is we see a lot of different behaviors that kind of spread throughout social networks. And these are a wide range of things like obesity, sleep loss. If you spend a time around people that have insomnia, trouble sleeping, you may find that you start having more trouble. Drug use, a huge thing to try when someone is trying to quit taking drugs, stop abusing drugs, is to get them out of the environment around the friends or people that they were using with. Just the removal from that environment, we often see that drug use decrease dramatically or stop. Great example of this is during the Vietnam War. A lot of people were taking, soldiers who were in Vietnam were using all sorts of drugs, things like even heroin, stimulants, to just help them deal with what they were seeing in that wartime environment. And what was really interesting is originally psychologists thought that as these soon-to-be veterans returned home to the US, we're going to have a massive drug problem on our hands. But in fact, is what they found with these veterans once they returned home and they were in a totally different environment and removed from that drug use, that the majority of them didn't have issues with continued drug use once home. Okay. Even things like happiness spreads throughout social networks. If you spend time with a lot of optimistic, upbeat people, you tend to be more optimistic and upbeat as well. And the reason why do human beings do this is a lot of it helps us to empathize. It helps us to put us in someone else's place. Okay. So mimicry or things like the chameleon effect aren't always negative in the same way that we sometimes take this idea of conformity that we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about today. So I have a question for you. At Los Osos, do you think you need to dress a certain way or like certain types of music. Why or why not? I'll say there's no right or wrong answer. It's just to give you something to think about. So go ahead and write your answer. Okay, so no matter what you said, like I said, there is no right or wrong. It's just whatever you think. There may be some of you I anticipate that says, yeah, to some extent, I do feel a little bit of pressure, maybe to wear a certain type of shoe or to listen to a particular artist if you hear a lot of people talking about them. And others of you might say, nah, don't really feel that. Um, I feel like there's a group for everyone on campus. Like I don't really feel pressured. Either way, you're good to go. But let's relate this to this idea of conformity. Okay. Conformity is defined as adjusting our own behavior to coincide with a group standard. So I put some images here of shoes that I have seen frequently on students. Okay, maybe it's a particular pair of Vans or some Air Force Ones here. But a lot of times you start seeing it maybe with just a couple students, and then soon, like everyone has like the it shoe to wear. And there's been all kinds of different shoe trends. I'm sure these are outdated. Y'all probably know more updated things. So conforming can be as simple as a clothing trend. It could be something like vaping or using things like jewels, where if you start having friends use things like that, you might become more apt as you adjust your behavior to try to coincide with that group standard. You want to fit in with your peers. Okay. Same thing, often alcohol as related to conformity as well. So there was a psychologist named Solomon Asch in the mid 1950s who wanted to study this idea of conformity. So he recruited 50 male students from Swarthmore College, this is on the East Coast, to take part in this experiment. So what he did was have one participant, along with about 7, some groups smaller, some groups larger, Confederates, meaning people that were in on the experiment. And what he did was he put them in, it was like a classroom setting, and all of the people, so say all 8 people in this case, were presented with the line task, which is what you see in this picture. So essentially what they would do is they would show them a line like exhibit 1. You can see where my mouse is moving right now. And they would ask them which line over here was the same length of line or matched exhibit 1. And then they would go down the line. So imagine just this line of people. Kind of put yourself in the shoes of the participant, okay? This line of people, and they're asked to give their answers out loud. So Confederate number 1 maybe says C. And Confederate 2 says C. Confederate 3 says C. Confederate 4 says C. And then it gets to you. Okay. And you have to make the decision, do I go along with the group? Do I conform and choose C? Or do I choose what I can see as the right answer with A? Okay. And what they found over 12 different trials is about 75% of the participants conformed at least once, okay? Whereas 25% of the participants never conformed. They were willing to give the right answer, even though the other people in the group did not. Just FYI, we'll watch some video of this in class when I see you as well. So this leads to the question, one, what made people both more likely to conform and less likely to conform? Okay. So what strengthens conformity? And you can kind of see the people here that were the participants. These things you do need to know. Okay. So what makes conformity more likely? 1, someone's made to feel incompetent or insecure. So imagine if you have a group of your peers and I made you answer out loud and all these people were giving an answer. Okay, you might question, especially if it's a topic you're a little bit shaky on, you might be more likely to go along with the group because you start questioning your own intelligence or your own vision in this case. Okay. Another thing that strengthens conformity is the group has at least 3 people. So notice there would be several people first that would give the wrong answer before it would get to the participant. If the participant was first, it's not going to affect them. Okay. 3, the group is unanimous. Unanimous, there we go. So they all gave the same wrong answer. 4, someone admires the group's status. So if you think about conformity in general, not just about Ash's experiment, but if you're trying to fit in with a certain group of people, or you want a certain person to be your friend, you may be more likely to adjust your appearance or what you're wearing or the way you act to make it more similar to them so that they'll accept you. Next, if you've made no prior commitment to any one response. Okay, they found in different versions of this experiment that if the participant was allowed to write down their answer before anyone gave answers out loud, they were less likely to conform. Okay. And finally, others in the group observe your behavior. So if the person was able to secretly write down their answer and didn't have to answer out loud, they became less likely to conform as well. So what I'd like you to do is tell me 3 elements that make someone more likely to conform. So go ahead and write. Okay. So maybe you said things like the group is unanimous, that it's a group of people that they look up to. Maybe it's that they felt insecure about maybe their own knowledge or their own vision. Okay. You can check back in your notes as well if you wrote something different to see if you got that correct. So there's 2 more reasons why we conform. And we're going to hear this when we watch the video in class, but I want to give you a little preview first. Okay. There's 2 kind of big reasons that it boils down to as to why we might conform. So one of them is called normative social influence. Notice the word norm in there. And the other is informational social influence. So let's talk about those. So the first one with normative social influence, those are reasons that we conform because I want to fit in with this group. Okay. I want to gain these people's approval. I want them to like me. I want them to think of me as one of them. So if you notice, I said point out the norm. I want to fit in as the norm. I want to fit in as normal with this group. Okay. I love this little phrase. To get along, we go along with it. So maybe you do something. Maybe it's use a vape, drink that drink when you're at a party because you want to get along. So you just go along with it at the time. You're trying to gain approval. Okay. On the other hand is informational social influence. This is where, for example, during Ash's experiment, where you might start questioning your own vision. And you start thinking to yourself, dang, maybe their eyes are better than mine, or I'm at a weird angle and I'm not seeing it the same way. Since they're all giving the right answer, maybe their vision is better than mine. So I'm just going to go along with them. Or if it was a more extensive answer, let's say like the teacher is asking for responses in class and everyone seems to be giving a similar response. And you really at first thought that it was a different answer, but you start questioning your own judgment, your own ability to either figure out the math problem or to pull that psych topic from memory. So you just accept the other people's answer as they must be correct because there's more of them. You'll hear one little kind of thought in the video, like there's more of them, there's only one of me, and they're all giving the same answer. Therefore, they're probably right. But it's based on me questioning my own information. So what I'd like you to do is answer this question. What is the difference between normative and informational social influence? Okay, so again, as you're checking your answer, with normative, it's to go along with the group to be able to fit in. That idea of to get along, we go along. Where with informational, you actually start questioning your own intelligence, your own vision, and maybe they're more correct than you. Okay, one last piece to talk about, really important experiment, is Stanley Milgram's experiment and its relationship to this idea of obedience. So, Stanley Milgram, another social psychologist, he was actually a classmate of Zimbardo's, who was a student of Solomon Asch. And what really grabbed Milgram's interest, I don't have this on the slide, was trying to figure out how could the atrocities of the Holocaust, how could they have occurred? How could you take these German citizens turned Nazi camp guards, soldiers, etc.? How did you get them to just go along with everything that was suggested to them? Why didn't any of them stop it? Okay. So, to conduct his experiment, he again advertises for participants. This happens to take place at Yale University. And Yale, the Yale name is going to be really important here. Okay. As a part of the study, once he has these participants, the experiment is designed to have kind of three main people involved. So you have the participant themselves that is just coming into this. They were a volunteer that is going to be assigned the role of teacher. You're going to have two confederates, meaning two people that are in on it with the experimenter, with Milgram and his team. Okay. One of them is going to take the role of the learner, and the other is going to take the role of the experimenter. So what you're seeing in this picture, okay, the man in the white is the learner. And notice they're hooking him up to what looks like some electrodes, something that can deliver an electric shock. This person here, if you see my mouse moving, he's wearing like a lab coat, makes him look very official, like doctor-like. He's the experimenter. Okay, he's actually an actor, as is this person. Okay, and then finally you have the participant here, the teacher, and he's the one that's not in on it. Okay. So kind of the setup is the teacher is asked to help hook up the learner to these electrodes. This is in a separate room. Then the teacher and the experimenter leave to a different room that's on the other side of this wall. Okay, so think of them as sitting over here. I'll show you a diagram on the next slide. And what the teacher is asked to do is to present a memory test. Every time the learner answers wrong, the teacher was to give an electric shock. Okay. And the shocks would range in voltage from very low all the way up to more than 400 volts that could potentially kill a person. Okay. So here's how that went. First, take a look at the setup. So you have that student, the learner. Remember, they're in a separate room. You have the teacher. Okay, they're the participant. And then in the corner was the experimenter, just kind of observing the process and supposedly recording the data. Okay. So what ended up happening is they would continue on with the test, asking these series of memory questions. And if the student got it wrong, the teacher was supposed to deliver an electric shock starting at very low voltage. And every time the student got it wrong, the teacher would increase the voltage. So every time increasing the voltage. Okay. If at any point the teacher was hesitant and said something like, I don't know if I should do this. Like, are they okay? Like, am I hurting them? The experimenter would say things like, please continue. Or the experiment requires you to continue. Or you have no other choice but to continue. These were the only four things that they said. Okay. And the teacher would have to make the choice, do I continue to increase the shocks or not? Meanwhile, the student, who FYI was not actually hooked up to anything that could actually harm them, they had pre-recorded them saying things like, ouch, and screaming, and let me out of here, let me out of here. Okay. But again, the teacher was encouraged through these statements to continue. Okay. Here were the results. 65% or 2/3 of the participants, the teachers, continued to the very highest level of 450 volts. And by that point, the student, the learner, was completely silent anytime they pushed the shock button. So they didn't know if they were okay or not. All of the participants went to at least 300 volts before they refused to stop. So, what did we learn from this? Okay. This is what the machine looked like. You'll see it in the video that I show you in class as well. So we know that obedience is highest, that people are much more likely to follow orders when the person who's giving the order is perceived to be a legitimate authority figure. So the actor playing the experimenter looked very official. He was wearing a lab coat, looked like a doctor, like someone I could trust. Think of like someone in a military uniform. Okay. 2, the authority figure was supported by a prestigious institution. Okay. Yale is pretty prestigious, right? Like this is Ivy League. This person's from Yale telling me to do it, that it's going to be okay. So I guess I'm going to continue. Okay. 3, the victim was depersonalized. Notice that they didn't have the teacher have to face the learner as he was giving the shocks. Instead, they were removed in a different room. For those of you that know your history, think about the ways in which the Jews and the Jehovah's Witnesses and the gypsies and the homosexuals and all of these people were killed was often in very depersonalized ways. Okay. And finally, there were no role models for defiance. The teacher was in their room on their own without being able to see that it was okay to say no. Okay. If they would have had a role model and got to witness someone else refuse, they likely would have been more likely to refuse themselves. Oh, forgot that was it. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in class. I will show you some video of this as well. So I have some practice questions for you before we wrap it up. So first, which of the following is an example of conformity? So go ahead and choose your response. So the correct answer is B. Renee begins to buy the same brand of sweatshirt that most of the kids in her school are wearing. Number 2. Groundbreaking research on obedience was conducted by whom? Go ahead and choose. The correct answer is D, Stanley Milgram. And just an FYI, you're getting to the point now in the course where for most of these people, these are names that you've heard before, with the exception of letter E, Jean Piaget. He will be in our next unit on development. But you should kind of think, okay, Bandura, that's Bobo doll, that's observational learning. Okay, Solomon Asch, that was conformity, the line experiment we just talked about. Zimbardo is the prison experiment. Like you should be at a point to be able to identify these things. Number 3, classic studies of obedience indicate that about this number of the participants were willing to administer what they believed to be 450 volt shocks to other humans. Go ahead and select. The correct answer is E, 2/3. And last question. Obedience to authority, when the authority figure is asking someone to shock another person, is highest when what is true? Go ahead and select. The correct answer is D. The authority figure is from a prestigious institution. That is the end of our Module 75 notes. We will discuss, I'll give you more illustrations in class. We'll watch some video. I hope you have a great day whenever you're getting these done.